The heavy thud of a baton against flesh echoed in the alleyway long before anyone could see what was happening. Darius Mitchell tasted copper in his mouth, spitting blood out onto the concrete, and thought, with an odd flash of calm, "This is how men lose faith." Everything smelled of wet garbage and despair. Yet Darius remained resolute, even as Officer Randall pressed a knee into his spine and pinned his face to the ground. Once a lifetime ago, Darius had encountered countless bullies just like these men, always quick to use fists and intimidation. That was before law school, before the years spent poring over case files and forging an unbreakable sense of justice. "You think you're tough, huh?" Officer Bailey sneered, shining his flashlight directly into Darius's eyes. The harsh beam swallowed Darius's face, making it impossible for the officer to read the fleeting expression of indignation beneath. Darius was no stranger to prejudice. He had grown up in a world that taught him about caution, taught him to pay attention to how he walked, how he spoke, how he dressed, lest he appear suspicious. But never in his worst nightmares did he imagine how abruptly, how brazenly these two officers would decide he was a criminal, a suspicious individual, nothing more than a problem to be subdued. "He just won't keep still," Officer Randall hissed, twisting Darius's arm behind his back. "We told you. Put your hands where we can see them." "I was only trying to pick up my phone," Darius replied, voice muffled by the pavement. He wanted to remain calm, even as pain lanced from his shoulder to his fingertips. "It fell from my pocket when you shoved me." He struggled to keep the rage at bay. He had spent his entire life developing patience, a virtue that was essential in the legal profession. But the anger was always a caged beast, rumbling inside him whenever he confronted senseless brutality. On the ground, he felt both powerless and oddly assured. He knew the law, knew what they were doing was illegal. His mind automatically cataloged the offense: excessive force, false arrest, violation of civil rights. When he got out of this, he would have recourse. Somewhere down the alley, a door creaked open. The occupant of a nearby apartment, a shadowy figure against the dim light, startled at the scene. But the door closed quickly. No one wanted trouble with uniformed officers, not in this part of the city, where the only guarantee was that you'd be on your own. "Shut up," Officer Bailey said, delivering a harsh kick to Darius's ribs to emphasize his words. The blow forced all air out of Darius's lungs. He coughed, wincing, feeling something hot in his side. Not broken, but bruised badly. He clenched his teeth, determined not to cry out or beg. This was bigger than him. This moment signified a harsh reminder that the system was still plagued by ancient prejudices and that some men were dangerous when given badges. "Already had a complaint about you," Officer Randall said, flipping Darius around to face him. "Somebody called in a possible drug deal in this area. And guess who we found lurking around in the dark?" Darius didn't bother answering. Not that anything he said would matter. He could see it in their eyes. They were out to make an example of someone. And a tall black man in an alley was all the justification they needed. When they marched him to the squad car, Darius's mind raced. He pictured the well-worn oak desk in his judge's chambers, the thick legal tomes lining the walls, a testament to decades of law and order. Would they realize their mistake? Probably not. They'd just see handcuffs and a suspect. They wouldn't learn his name until they booked him. And that moment, Darius knew, would be a moral landslide. The state's newest and youngest circuit court judge, he thought ironically, about to be thrown in jail for absolutely nothing. He allowed himself a bitter smile, even as they cuffed him too tightly, tightening the cold metal around his wrists. Something told him the night was only beginning. The drive to the station was silent. The hum of the engine mingled with Darius's ragged breathing. Officer Bailey's knuckles clenched and unclenched around the steering wheel. Officer Randall stared out the window, occasionally muttering, "Damn punks." In that darkness, Darius couldn't decide if the ache in his stomach was from Bailey's kicks or the realization of how quickly justice could be perverted. Maybe it was both. He pictured how he had presided over countless bail hearings, instructing folks about their rights. He remembered the day he took his oath in a small ceremony, beaming at his mother in the audience. Now, not even a year into his appointment, He was a victim of the very attitudes he'd been working to dismantle from a bench. They yanked him out of the car at the station, still none the wiser about who he was. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, pushing back the pain, as he prepared to show them exactly what they'd done when they finally ran his name. The second he heard the beep of the station door, Darius realized the next few minutes would change these officers' lives forever, just as they had tried to change his. Officer Randall's first hint of trouble arrived in the form of a wide-eyed desk sergeant who stared at the booking sheet as though it contained a ticking bomb. The desk sergeant skimmed the paperwork once, then again, tapping the pen nervously against the clipboard. He glanced at Darius, clothes rumpled, cheeks smeared with drying blood, and then back at the officers. "Mitchell," the sergeant finally said. "Darius Mitchell." His voice wavered, revealing a flicker of recognition. Wait." Officer Bailey shrugged. "What's the matter?" The sergeant cleared his throat. "You sure you got the right guy?" "Because that name." "I don't care what name he has," Bailey snapped. "We caught him loitering, possible drug deal. Resisted arrest and assaulted me when I tried to question him." Darius remained silent, but his lip curled in disgust. Assault. Indeed, he had barely lifted his arms to shield himself. He was tempted to retort, but sensed something more powerful unfolding. Let them bury themselves, he thought. Let them incriminate themselves with each lie. Officer Randall slammed the booking documents onto the desk. "Just process him, Sarge. Then we'll figure out the rest." The sergeant looked as though he wanted to say more, but he bit his tongue and clicked on the station's computer to begin inputting the details. Each keystroke seemed to resonate in the room as an approaching storm. Darius could practically count down the seconds until the system flagged him. He kept his gaze steady on the computer screen. All at once, the sergeant straightened. His eyes flicked between Darius and the officers. "Judge Darius Mitchell," he said, voice hushed but taut with alarm. "He was sworn in a few months ago over at county court. This is him." A moment of absolute, stifling silence filled the station. Then Bailey's voice emerged, low and dangerous. "You must be kidding me. That's not possible." Darius met the officer's gaze. "I never lied. You never asked." Randall barked out a laugh, though it sounded forced, edging on frantic. He can't be a judge. Look at him." Darius flinched at the racist implication, but lifted his chin, every inch the embodiment of authority. "Yes," Darius said quietly. "Look at me. And if you know anything about the law, you'd realize you're in deep trouble." The station erupted into a flurry of stammering. The sergeant all but scrambled from behind the desk, removing the cuffs from Darius's wrists with fumbling hands. Randall cursed under his breath. Bailey was pale, no longer the picture of bravado he'd been in that alley. He looked as though someone had ripped away the illusions he'd carried for years, illusions of absolute power and invincibility. We can sort this out," Bailey stuttered. "Maybe a misunderstanding." Darius squared his shoulders. The hatred in their eyes had not entirely vanished. There was still that flicker of malice, a readiness to blame him. He'd seen it too many times. Some men never accept responsibility. They simply try to wriggle out of the consequences. He accepted a cup of water the sergeant offered, swishing away the taste of blood. Carefully, he pressed a cloth to his split lip. "I'll be contacting my attorney, and I'll be notifying the Department of Internal Affairs about this incident." Bailey opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. Randall, for all his swagger, now looked anywhere but at Darius. They both knew they had arrested a sitting judge. Their consequences would be monumental. "Your Honor, the sergeant started, but Darius lifted a hand. "Don't." He let the single syllable hang in the air. He almost felt sorry for the sergeant, who was merely stuck in the middle. But Darius remembered his own battered ribs and bleeding face. There could be no mercy for blatant abuse of power. A week later, Darius found himself in his office, wearing a crisp gray suit instead of the tattered clothes from that night. He tested the stitches on his lip, feeling the faint twinge of pain. Each ache was a reminder of a night that had changed everything. He had filed complaints, following procedures meticulously. The system, ironically, was slow to act, but Darius was patient. When the courthouse clerk informed him that officers Randall and Bailey had an upcoming hearing, assigned to Darius's docket by a twist of fate or perhaps cosmic irony, Darius stared at the notice for a long moment. The charges against them were serious: falsifying reports, use of excessive force, racial profiling. "You want to recuse yourself, Your Honor?" the clerk asked gently. He considered it, swallowing hard. Normally, a judge would recuse themselves if personally involved. That was standard procedure. But as Darius looked at the photos of the bruises on his torso and the dried blood on his shirt from that night, he recalled the second he realized how precarious justice could be when those in power abused it. "No," Darius said quietly. "I'll stay on." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "I understand." To Darius, this was bigger than personal revenge. Recusal would allow them a hearing under another judge, but that would mean letting his abusers face the usual system they so easily manipulated. This time, the system needed a different kind of accountability. Darius intended to deliver it. He took a steady breath and signed off on the docket. Soon, Officer Randall and Officer Bailey would be forced to stand in front of him, again, and face the consequences of their actions in a court of law. Outside the courthouse window, the midday sun shone bright. For the first time since that night, Darius felt a sense of peace, tempered by resolve. He had witnessed injustice enough to know real change doesn't come easily, but some battles must be fought, no matter the cost. On the day of the hearing, a swirl of tension loomed in the courthouse halls. The reporters had gathered in droves, the tabloids scrambling to spin a sensational headline out of two racist cops facing a black judge they had beaten and wrongfully arrested. Officers Randall and Bailey arrived in matching uniforms, now tainted by the accusations against them, and made their way through the corridor, ignoring the barrage of camera flashes. Darius stepped into the courtroom. Each click of his polished shoes on the marble floor signaled an unwavering sense of purpose. Heads turned. A hush fell. The uniformed bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Mitchell." The irony weighed on everyone present. Darius approached the bench, his black robe flowing. He settled into his seat, scanning the packed courtroom. On one side, the prosecution, empowered by the internal investigation that had collected evidence of the officer's wrongdoing. On the other, the defense, representing the two men who had pinned Darius in that dark alley and nearly broke his ribs for nothing more than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "All be seated," he said clearly, voice cutting through the stillness. Randall and Bailey kept their eyes averted. Though the defense attorney tried to project confidence, his posture suggested otherwise, as though he recognized the near impossibility of this scenario. Darius cleared his throat, addressing the court. "We are here today to hear the case of the people versus Officers Randall and Bailey on charges of using excessive force, falsifying police reports, and criminal misconduct. Counsel for the prosecution, you may proceed." The prosecuting attorney rose, launching into a methodical recount of the events leading up to the arrest, relying on witness statements and station footage. Darius remained impartial, or tried to. He fought down the memory of a baton slamming into his ribs. The prosecuting attorney highlighted the glaring inconsistencies in the arrest record, revealing how the officer's claims of resisting arrest contradicted the physical evidence. By the time the defense took the floor, the tension felt suffocating. Randall's lawyer argued that the officers had reason to suspect Darius was armed, that the area was known for narcotics activity, and that an unfortunate escalation of force occurred due to uncooperative behavior. Darius's hand tightened on the gavel, but he maintained a judge's composure. The entire room sensed the moral tightrope he was walking. The defense finished with a final plea that the officers had only done what they believed necessary under ambiguous circumstances. Ambiguous. The word reverberated in Darius's mind, and he had to steel himself from letting raw emotion spill over. He paused, then spoke with measured clarity, ensuring every syllable dripped with the gravity of the moment. "Officers Randall and Bailey," Darius said, meeting each man's gaze, "this court has reviewed the evidence of your actions the night of the arrest. Regardless of how you interpreted the situation, the law, and the code of ethics governing your profession, is unequivocal about the use of force and truthful reporting. He took a breath, letting the hush deepen. I was the victim of your misconduct. While I stand here as a judge, obligated to impartiality, I cannot ignore the factual record. The station's footage, eyewitness accounts, and your falsified statements are evidence that you willfully violated the rights of an unarmed citizen. A ripple ran through the gallery as Darius recounted the officer's injuries to him, documented injuries that clearly refuted their claims of self-defense. Even the defense attorney seemed resigned. Therefore, it is the determination of this court, Darius continued, voice strong, that your conduct merits a recommendation for dismissal from the police force, in addition to possible penalties for criminal assault and falsification of official documents. The ultimate sentencing will occur following a separate criminal trial, where you will be judged by a jury of your peers. Today's hearing is not the final word, but let it be clear, you are to be suspended from active duty, effective immediately. Officer Bailey made a strangled sound, as if he wished to shout in protest, but nothing emerged. Randall's face had gone ashen. The formalities concluded in a blur. The bailiff escorting them from the courtroom as onlookers murmured at the unprecedented sight. Two uniformed cops led away from the presence of the very man they had brutalized. Only after the final echo of footsteps had faded did Darius retire to his chambers. Alone at last, he ran a hand over his face, bracing himself on the edge of his desk. His breathing was shallow, and the adrenaline that had kept him poised was beginning to subside. Slowly, he sank into his chair. He glanced at a photograph near his desk, the day he had been sworn in as a judge. His mother's proud smile gazed back at him. Then he remembered the night in the alley, the sting of the baton, and the suffocating sense of helplessness. It reminded him why he had chosen this path. For too many, justice was an abstraction, an idea that existed in textbooks, but not on the streets. And if he, a judge, could be brutalized so readily, what about all the others without power or recognition? He resolved, in that moment, to keep fighting for reforms. It wouldn't erase the scars, but perhaps it would ensure fewer people wound up with identical scars in the future. Outside, the sun slowly descended behind the courthouse pillars, as if marking the end of a tumultuous chapter. But Darius Mitchell knew this was only the beginning of a longer battle, one in which truth and justice must triumph, no matter how many withered institutions stood in the way. The end.